Hey, it's Andy, and it's the week of Thanksgiving in the States, and so we're going to take a break from releasing new episodes and give you a chance to catch up on past ones that you might have missed, or to check out two of my favorite past interviews, Part 1 with David Monn on Monday, and Part 2 with David on Wednesday. Both were recorded well before the pandemic, and so you're going to hear the original interviews. I want to also say that in spite of all the challenges that we're all facing at this time in history, I hope we can all feel gratitude for what we do have. And one of the wonderful things I have in my life is you, our listeners. I really appreciate all the time you give to listening to these interviews and all the comments through reviews and social media. And I also want to thank my guests who have given their time and let themselves be vulnerable to express themselves in this show, The Wedding Biz. So thank you all and have a wonderful holiday. David, thank you for being on the show again for a part 2. I'm so excited.
I love it. I'm happy. For the last time, thank you for actually allowing me to be on your show.
Oh, absolutely. We had so many great comments. And actually, that's kind of how I want to start, is that people generally, in terms of the average comment that I got, was they want to hear more stories. And when we talked about, when you talked about the senses, smell, sound, sight, touch, taste, how every event has to combine it. It all has to work together. If one is off, there's not a cohesiveness. It's not as impactful. You also talked about incorporating 3 architectural elements: authenticity, scale, detail. If you could give some more examples from events of how you align all the senses for an event and build in the authenticity, scale, detail, that would be wonderful.
You know, it's a funny thing. I mean, I always tell people, and we sort of touched on this a little bit the last time, is people want to see their party, and they have a visual of it in some form before they even begin. And I think there's a little bit of the mistake. And if we don't look at the end, we just know where we're starting, and we start with some of the things that are very basic. You know, a party is about, regardless of what the party is about, it's about a person first and foremost. And then we get to the occasion, and then we get to a location. And those things are already, they're defined in some form. Then we get to where we are in the time of the year. Is it a summertime? Is it a winter? And if we do not let our then idea of something hold those things hostage, we will already have in place the things that start to make the senses make sense. Okay? So, and I often say this, like, we have probably 8 out of 10 brides when we come in for a wedding. They have this idea of a flower that they like, because somehow and I think flowers are, I love flowers. I am an avid gardener. I have been my whole life. But yet flowers are only one very, very, very small element of the entire mosaic that's needed to make an experience. But that's the thing that's most visual to people. So they come with that first, typically, especially brides. And they'll say they love peonies. I mean, there's nothing more romantic than peonies. Well, a bride will come to me in the middle of her wedding, maybe in the fall, or it may be in the winter, and I love peonies, or I love lilacs and things. Well, they don't exist then.
Right.
And it's not necessarily that you can't get them, because, you know, the world today there's a world market, and there's, you know, the Japanese have propagated incredible varieties of flowers that are grown all year long. We have airplanes. I used to say, if God didn't do it, we shouldn't do it. And one bride said to me once, well, God invented an airplane. Someone did it, so why can't we? I'm like, well, that's taking it too far. But even though we can do it, it will not feel right. So that idea, and I always sort of try to stress to people, don't let your idea of something hold hostage the foundation of what is already there.
Yeah.
So when we are in the person, the place, the time of year, then the senses already start to fill into that. And it's a simple formula, actually. You know, I mean, I don't know. I always feel, I like to think about what I'm doing is not as something that I'm doing for one person, but that I'm doing that can actually inspire other people to do for themselves. And even when you're experiencing something, you're coming as a guest, to actually be part of it and see, oh, I could do that, or I understand that. And it shouldn't be so complicated that it is this mystery of magic that only a magician can do, but that every single person should be able to do all their time. I mean, maybe that's for me, it's the small boy that grew up in a town that was only dreamed of things that I wanted to be
Fayetteville, right?
Yeah. I wanted that to be something that I believe that even today. It's something that I believe everything I'm doing should be able to be inspiring for somebody else to do for themselves. And so when someone is seeing something there, it's not so simple, or it's not so complicated, rather. It's rather simple, so that it's a rule book that's easy for anyone to follow. So the senses, the time of year, the location, all become an easy formula. Not we have to create this idea and then the idea of how do you accomplish the idea.
Can you tell me a story from an actual event that was one of your favorites that helps? I know everything you do illustrates. I was going to say that illustrates what you're talking about. Every event you do does. Can you tell me one or two stories of how you manifested that?
Yes. I think the easiest one is the Costume Institute that I did the very first year. And I was naive at the time of thinking that, it was in the Met that we would be able to do anything we wanted, and I first set out that it was fragrance. Fragrance is the most important part, right? And the Met said we can't do fragrances in the Met. So we'll back it back a sense. So who's the person? The Costume Institute that year was for Chanel. What's the occasion? It is celebrating the house of Chanel. What's the location? We're in the Met. Now, we have to complete the story. It's an evening. It's a dinner. And we are arriving into this, and we want to transport you into some sort of location. So I discovered that Chanel had two favorite flowers. One was a camellia. The other one was gardenia.
Okay.
So now I have a flower that I can actually work with. It has an identity.
Yeah.
And I have a flower that's very fragrant.
Yes.
So my sense of smell has already now, I have that. The occasion, obviously, again, we're going to celebrate Chanel. We're going to be in this location. So now the location that I want to create is an evening. I'm in the Met. It's an evening dinner. And the house of Chanel is French.
Okay.
So now I want to create an evening that is a French-inspired evening.
Yes.
And so we chose the Engelhart Court in the Metropolitan Museum, which has this very beautiful bank facade. It's called the bank facade, which looks like a very neoclassical house facade. So I used the house facade as though we were in the house.
Yeah.
This would be the house of Chanel.
Wow.
Having dinner in the garden.
Yes.
And so the beginning of the journey started as you walked up the steps of the Met, coming in the Met. In the center of the Met, because I had to find a way to get fragrance in that the Met said we couldn't do, but a flower does. So I didn't actually do it. The flower did it.
That's great.
I had a basket that was filled with thousands of gardenias. You saw this. We were arriving on a sort of moonlit night. You smelled this because the air was sort of in a backdraft as you were coming up the stair. You smelled this gardenia.
Oh, even before
you even got in.
That's wonderful.
Smell. It was, I mean, and truly, I always say this, I don't do these things. There's somebody bigger than this that does that. It was really divine that happened. But you smelled the smell. You then saw this basket. I created a pattern using a lighting gobo pattern that was a breakup of like moonlight through the trees.
Oh.
And then you walked through an alley that was, I would say, roughly probably 60 foot long, of 30-foot tall pear trees that was in the springtime, full blossom pear trees, that you walk through this alley. And I had created a soundtrack of tree frogs and crickets and water trickling. So you knew you were on your way into a garden.
Mm-hmm.
You were in that feeling. And then you arrived at the Engelhart Court, which had been transformed into a formal French garden with all sorts of live, highly manicured hedges and topiaries, and the carpeting was to look like pea stone, like as if you were on a stone surface, and then just baskets filled with gardenias. And the interesting thing was, and then I used park chairs because you would have been on a garden.
Great.
So you wouldn't have gone to a garden and been in a ballroom chair. Or
Right.
It was a beautiful park chair.
Yeah.
So all of those elements were in play. And so the experience was complete and the story was complete. And that same thing was, they're very simple rule books or rules rather. If you just fill them in, you get the complete story. And it's, I don't know. I kind of think it's kind of simple.
Oh, and while you're telling me the story, David, it's so interesting because I smell gardenias. Like you're taking me right there.
Yeah.
You just mentioned rules. You talked about order being one of the main rules, or an event won't flow and function. Can you give me an example of order? How you apply order to events? I mean, obviously, I hear it in what you're saying, but if you could be more specific.
Well, we talked a little bit about this just before we began. The only one thing that you cannot control is the energy of people. Mm-hmm. And spontaneity is something that we all love, and we think it's that wonderful thing that happens. But spontaneity is, it's like winning the lottery. It's 1 in a million. And so order is incredibly important. People follow in a rhythm. Most people, even when they know each other, when they come together, there's that moment of getting to know each other, even again from that day, whether we've had a bad day or we've had a happy day or whatever. So we have to pull that energy together. That happens. It takes a bit for it to sort of settle itself, and then we get into a rhythm of the things that we know in order that we do. Mm-hmm. People socialize. Then from socialize, they sit down and they then dine to conversation to moments of highlights. And then you move on to whether if you're going to continue, if it's a wedding, or another kind of party, you may be then celebrating. Mm-hmm. But none of that happens without great discipline. Mm-hmm. I find all the time the challenge that I have and generations, by the way, do things differently. So, you need to step back and look at who are coming to this party. So if it's a group of all, older people of a certain generation, I have clients that during they don't even want to have a cocktail hour. They want to, cocktail hours are 15, 20 minutes. And it's funny in England, which cocktail hour is not something that really exists in parts of Europe. Okay. It is, you arrive for dinner, cocktails are from X time. And they will say, on a formal invitation in England, it will tell you cocktails at, we'll say 7:30, seated for dinner at 8:15. And that means at 8:15, you are seated at dinner. And that is really the thing. So you can arrive, gives you travel time or whatever to arrive. It's not that, here in America, we love the cocktail hour. Mm-hmm. But I believe also that if you overextend that time, I'm not a cocktail hour loving sort of person. I believe we should get to the purpose of what we want to be doing in the evening. If you want it to be a cocktail houred evening, then you should just have a casual sort of evening, and it shouldn't even become sitting down for dinner so much of sorts. But then we get to and as I was saying, some in older generations, I have clients that music is part of. The senses that I believe are what you hear is really very important. It puts you into this place, into mood. But I have clients that will absolutely say the minute they get to dinner, they want nothing. They want no music at all because they're about conversation.
I get that.
Yeah.
They just want to focus.
And they will say, if somebody doesn't have enough to say, they shouldn't be at the table.
That's funny. That's good.
And then there's an entire other group of, as it reaches to younger, that's not their, that's not going to be their strength. And then there is another group that will, they want to be dancing, and they want to, if it's a wedding, they want to be dancing from in between courses. Those are things I find very, that's where the energy flow is incredibly, incredibly important. So now there's a discipline that really must be very carefully managed. And once you start that arc of people and their energy moving, taking people from a dance floor back to a table, then from a table again to a dance floor,
very difficult,
is incredibly dangerous.
I don't want to assume. What do you mean by that?
Because energy builds by people.
Yeah.
You cannot just turn it on. It cannot be, because you have musicians, whether they're DJ or they're an incredible band, they must read that room.
Yes.
And there is no guaranteed formula to that.
The transition is a hugely creative element that's critical.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And there is a group of people that, depending on that room and that client, the people that are, we try very often, not very often, we do every time, we let our talent know. So whether it's DJ, band, or whatever, we let them know the demographic of the group, so that they understand that there is from the 70s to the 50-year-olds, the 50s to the 30s to the 20s. There's this number of people in the room, so that they can, in their mind, have an idea. Because none of that group together love the exact same music, except for maybe, I always used to say, if all else fails, throw on Michael Jackson. Something could happen. But that being able to read that energy of a group is incredibly, it's spontaneous, and it's the talent of the talent to be able to read the energy, and then make that happen. And then you need to be, if you're going to do that multiple times in an evening, each time you do that, you risk the success level. Yeah. So I believe an evening should keep building itself, and once it's building, you don't let it fall. You keep adding, you keep adding. It's a challenge with young weddings, because the bride and groom today, all they want to do is dance.
That's right.
And I think it's an important thing, and it's rare to have happen. We just had a wedding, and this young couple, he was in the movie business, so he understood it, because he was, he's a storyteller. And I mean, every experience is a storyteller. Every party is a story. You want to tell it. Yeah. And he understood this, as did she. They said, the old-fashioned wedding was, first off, in the old world of weddings, the bride and groom did not get to invite people to the wedding. They invited their bridal party.
Yeah, but the parents
were inviting people to the wedding. And the parents invited people so that the families knew each other, of each bride and groom, and their worlds came together. And the bride and groom had their friends. At the end of the evening, the bride and groom left the party. Yeah. And they went off to their honeymoon, and the bride's parents continued the reception as the parents ended the evening.
That's right. I forget. I'm old enough to know. They would send them. We'd have a send-off, but the party would continue.
The party continued. Yeah. And it continued in the way that it ended as a beautiful ending arc. It wasn't, the last dance the bride and groom had gone. Yes. The bride and groom were to go on their honeymoon at that point.
They were to have
their wedding night, shall we say. And I love that, not just for the tradition sense, but I think there's nothing worse than an evening ending with the bride and groom at the party. Because then you just leave. It's like there should be a linger. The taste should slowly leave until it fades to dark.
I like that. Yeah.
And so this particular bride and groom, They exited with everybody in the party, and then the party continued for another 20 minutes of music, and there was another dance, and there was another, then, after dinner drink being served. And it was this, everyone saw them going, they loved it, their friends continued. But that storyline is important. And today it's very different, but I think that when you orchestrate every single one of those details to the very end with discipline, which is not spontaneous. Even the most spontaneous moment has to be planned.
Yeah, right. I agree. Yeah, we talked about that earlier. Plan for spontaneity within the structure.
Absolutely.
Well, how do you feel about after parties then? Because that's become such a big thing now.
Again, if it is an after party, I'm okay with them.
Yeah.
And this particular party that I'm talking about did do an after party.
It's kind of a chance for the younger ones usually,
the bride
right?
and groom left. That's the
they didn't even go to the after party?
No, they left. They went off.
That's interesting.
They went off. It was kind of fabulous in a way. But the young people all still continued on. We did have an after party, and it was an entirely different feel.
Yeah, sure.
It was in a different location. It was it was actually incredible in a way. And I think the part that's hard is bride and grooms want it to the very, 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 very end. And there is that, I think there's that part that just feels like, you kind of have to say goodnight at some point, and anyhow, I love after parties. I think if they become a continuation of the first party, then you should have just had the first party continue. It should be something that feels very different.
I also want to ask you, talk about different. You had talked a great deal about how you don't do themes, you do the client.
Yeah.
In terms of fundraising galas, other kinds of social events, corporate events, can you talk about how you approach those?
Well,
they're so different.
They're even more important that way. So, corporate and fundraisers. Well, we'll separate them and fundraisers in particular. And I've spent many years. In fact, my very first thing that I ever really did that was visibly seen was the New York Public Library, and helped to take that event, which had been traditionally done in a very, very important New York social event, and give it another dimension. Through that, and then through many years of doing this, I have come to something that is really important, and I think it's universal. And I tell this to people all the time now. And people that go, the audience that go to non-for-profits, go for one of two reasons, and one of two reasons only: social currency or social obligation. They do not go for the cause. And if you are planning an event, if you keep that in mind, you will be successful. And then you apply that evening to those two people. Why are they in the room? Today, there are so many causes. Not that the cause is not worthy.
Okay.
I'm not ever going to take that, because that's, of course, that is there.
Yeah.
But there are so many causes, and we all have them independently, and we believe in our own independently. And the reason we go to somebody's cause is because my friend is on the board, my friend is the honoree, and I'm going for social obligation to my friend, or I actually want to be or known to that friend.
Okay.
So my social currency of going there, not the cause. So it's really, really, really important that if you want to be successful in a corporate or in a non-for-profit event, is to get people in, get them out, and do not burden them with the evening.
Don't burden them with the evening.
Do not burden them with the evening.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
And so that message that you tell of the evening, and it's a sad thing to say, because there is no greater place on this planet that is charitable than America. In New York, in the world we're in, there's no greater city
huge here,
than New York in how we embrace and give in charities. And that being then the situation, more people want to pay to not go than they do go to an event because there are so many of them, right? As you venture out into other cities in the country, across the country, it is different. They're very social events. That actually makes the story even more important. The people that are in and going are there for social currency or social obligation. So now you then take that event, and then it's really, 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 really important that you, in a very succinct and exacting moment, tell the story of that organization, the DNA of who it is. There shouldn't be anything that's a theme that's outside of that moment, that you get them quickly, get it, and let them go.
Can you give an example? It's so fascinating how you're talking about this, how you're addressing, as you break it down to each of two different groups of people. Can you give some specifics of what you've done to address each of those through an example?
Sure. I'll use because it's an organization I'm passionate about, is the Animal Medical Center.
I was going to ask you about your interest in animals.
Animal Medical Center that has been incredibly generous to me and my little guy who used to be here. The evening is every year. It is, first off, the evening is in December. So it is not a Christmas theme, but it's a holiday theme of sorts, because it feels festive. And it is always tied to these dogs and these cats that we've created sculptures. It just simply stays that. The evening then is, and I stress this with all organizations when they begin, is you should open at the top of the night with a hello. And then if you do these honoree sorts of things, they need to happen very, very quickly. Never, ever, ever, if you can, at all cost, not allow an honoree to speak because you cannot control it.
Yes.
Anything you leave out of your control is then going to control you.
But at most of these events, nonprofits, they do have the honoree speak, don't they?
They do, but I actually...
How do you talk them out of it? You get
video.
Very clear...
Video.
I get
video,
it.
Because
now
you
you're
have
in
the control to edit it.
You're in control, yeah.
And you can ask the questions you want asked.
Yeah.
They can respond to them to tell the story of what you need to have told or want to have told. This is where you're talking about everything is a story and it needs to be produced. And when you allow something to open itself up, and there is then the social obligation currency people that are in the room. When you allow an evening, and it can be, and by the way, it can be an organization that is talking about abuse or child health, something that's so emotional.
Yeah.
But when you allow someone to speak and you give that hand over to them, if they speak for 10 minutes, the mind shuts down on 1 minute and 32 seconds. And beyond that, it becomes a burden. So if you start to then press upon the person that's in the room, then you run the risk of losing their attention. In the worst that can happen is because, it's a compounded thing, but when you're doing a non-for-profit, every single thing goes to profit. So the costs are always the most important part that people are doing. And the big costs for some of these things are light and sound and the cost to actually do that. So, and you want to put more people in the room so you make more money.
That's
so now
right.
we have a room that has a couple hundred people in it, and you've tried to skimp on the costs and the things. So you have the minimal that you can do with audio. And if people can't hear clearly that sound in the back corner of that room is overpowering their chit-chatting with their neighbor, once one person chit-chats, the next person chit-chats, and then that whole volume of level rises. And if somebody is speaking where you're losing people's attention or they're bored in it, even if they're talking about medical science that's going to, solve cancer, the whole purpose erodes.
Well, and we don't always know the ability of the person speaking to engage, to hold the crowd.
That's exactly right, because most of them are incredible people in the work they do. They're not performers.
Yeah.
So that's exactly right.
It is a performance. I love that you're saying that.
They are a performer, and they're not professional performers. Yeah. And so that is, I think, the death of some of these organizations. But I come back and I always say that, the DNA must show in each of these organizations. Another organization that I am also involved in is called Arts Connection. And it's an organization that puts art back into the public schools. And every little thing that happens in the evening, whether it's the color, whether it's the entertainment of the story, is something that is very, very clearly, it has to hit you over the head of what that organization is. So the theme relates to what that moment of art that they're going to showcase for that night, and it's quick and it's in and it's out.
And what about, I mean, this is all related, of course, but corporate events, I imagine it's all about messaging the brand.
It is. It has to be that.
Internally and externally.
Absolutely. I mean, I say this, a brand is not something you can create. A brand is the byproduct of what the actual thing does.
Yeah.
That is the brand of it. So whatever that may be, whether it's a corporate institution or it's a product, if it is not blatantly simple, that you get that core DNA of who they are and what they want to tell you, it doesn't matter that it's just a fun party. It doesn't, it doesn't hit. And I think there's, I look today and I think even in the fashion world, I look at some of the brands that are doing now extraordinary things because fashion has changed so dramatically, and the fashion shows. And Bureau Batak, who is somebody that I have great admiration for, and what they're doing now with some of these very large fashion houses of taking and moving these fashion shows on these remote locations, and they are taking a storyline of actually taking what does something look like in the real world, not just in this momentary extravagance that you're going to create to tell, because the fashion world is about fantasy and it's about illusion. But now they've taken these shows, and whether it's in Morocco or it's in the fields of France or it's on the coastline of California, where these fashion shows are just these extraordinary productions, are visually beautiful, but they actually put you into a place of what it would be to put that person in that element, in the real element, outside of doing it in the Palais Royal or something like that.
Yeah. I also want to talk about business. We touched on it a little bit last time, but you had said that 80% of it, of running the business of art, it's the business versus the creative side. 80% of it, I believe that's what you said.
Yeah.
And talked about wanting to be respected more for the business aspect as well, because there's assumptions made by people. And you talked about running a tight business. Can you say more about how you do that? The business aspect of what you do? Yeah.
So the creative aspect of what we do is what this business has a foundation of it in. But the actual business end of it, and I say business comes down to the dollars and the cents of it. And it's very, very complex. Our industry is one that keeps it keeps evolving and keeps growing. I mean, 20 years ago, we talked about this the last time. I mean, it used to be that there was a host or hostess, and they had their caterer that they called, they had their florist they called, and they then put this together. Now, these are entirely different worlds. Most people don't even have the sense of what they would want to do. They come to someone like myself or colleagues that's what they, and let us produce it. But the next step, which is really, really important, is there is a budget. It doesn't matter how extravagant those numbers can be. That budget, and it must be maintained. It must also have an accountability. A client wants to know that they've gotten the best value that they've gotten, not just that they've gotten the best idea. So over the years, and unfortunately in this industry, there is not a school to go to that is the 101 of how to run this part of the business. Yep. No, it's not. It's actually something I love to talk about, because then I think there's something in our industry, there's a tremendous opportunity for our industry to sort of somewhat even standardize. Nobody ever wants to tell their trade secrets, and nobody ever wants to tell their mechanism of profitability in their companies. But in essence of how we do what we do is some form of standard business practices on the whole would actually, I think, help our industry in some form. But my business, we cover every area of a business, of the design, from the design to the production of it. And so internally, whether it's a pencil or whether it's a scenic element, the cost mechanism and then the delivery of that is something that's highly, highly controlled. And it's a very difficult thing to do because in our business, we also don't do widgets. We are not all selling the same thing every single time. It's something very different. But a client coming understands, when I set out in this business many years ago, I had been for the better part of 10 years, I did interior design. And I always even knew then in my world, a client starts out, because it's an evolution process, and a client starts out with wanting to recover some furniture, and then before the project's finished, you've moved walls. And and there's always a counterpart to that. So typically there's the wife doing the project and the husband doing the business. And, there was always that sense that a project would start at $10 and it was to be done in 2 weeks, and it ended up being 6 months and $5,000 was the end. I'm, giving extremes, but not actually too extreme. And I always felt that was not someplace that somebody was secure in, including myself. That if managed expectations is something that I live by. And we work very hard to try to do. Not always successful at it, by the way. So I don't want to paint that picture that, it's always perfect. But that we start off with, if people understand that this is what this is going to be, and by the way, no client, it's the hardest thing to do. There is no one in this business that I think will ever tell you that getting the client to tell you how much they want to spend is the easy thing, or what they would like this to entail. They start with ideas, but yet every single person has a threshold they do not want to cross. And they will, and it's holding that kimono tight until you do that. And I always sort of try very hard to get people to understand, for me, it's not that I'm going to spend your money. I need to know what not to do to help this process become something that's workable.
I don't know if I totally follow that.
So people will come in and they'll say, well, I don't know what's this going to cost. And I say, it isn't what it's going to cost. I'd like to know what you'd like to spend. And if people have in their mind they want to spend $10,000, they most likely are going to tell you they want to spend $5,000, because they're hedging that, knowing that they're going to spend more. That's a very dangerous thing in my company to do, because I work backwards from that. It is not a la carte. That this is, here's your whole list. You can pick these sorts of things and then we add it up. It doesn't work that way. I work in the backward way. So that if you want to spend $10,000, I'm then going to dissect that all out to where does that need to be spent, and where do we cut off where no, spending there isn't important, but spending in another area is. Because it will give us more than had we spent over here. I don't know if I shared this in the last time we spoke, but I remember early on we had a client, and there was a location here in New York, and I go into it, and the carpeting is horrible. And the carpeting was going to dictate everything that needed to be done, because the carpeting is there. And in most every place you go, the carpeting does in fact dictate it, and I said to the client, told me what he wanted to spend. And in that, then when I made the presentation, I had a $27,000, I remember the number as if it were today, $27,000 to recarpet the place.
Jeez.
And he said, I'm never going to do that. Why would I do that? I'm not going to spend that money. And I said, let me show you, because over here in this, we're not going to spend over here. Because the carpet will make that not necessary. And I begged him to trust me on it. He actually had part ownership in this facility as well. And I was sort of knocking his carpet in a way, but he actually agreed to do it. And in the end, he saw that was the thing that made it entirely a different place.
Yes.
That even from then afterwards, when they renovated, they and still do engage me to help them with carpet selection so that it sets a palette. Because every single person that comes into to do an event in a place has their own idea.
Yeah.
And so the neutrality of something is really very important.
Yeah.
But that is an example of that money was more important than spent on that carpeting, regardless of that it was, what are you going to do afterwards? You can't look at it that way. You have to look at, here's the big picture of what we're trying to accomplish, and put that money in the right place. But back to the beginning of where that fits in a client base is very hard to get people to feel free to tell you where is their threshold, because in most instances it does. The past experience has not been that you end up at that threshold.
That's right.
You end up in a place later that you're in a corner and then you're forced. And that, to me, that's the unpleasant place ever to be. Because I think that once, all the hard work that you do and all the creation that you do, and I know from my company, but I also am certain of any of my other colleagues, and I've never really had this conversation with them, but I know it because we're in this to create.
Yes.
That you never want that creation to be blemished by someone feeling uncomfortable about the cost of it. And as they've gotten too close to it, that they're unhappy, that the costs have so escalated that they're in a place that they're not enjoying it.
Yes.
In the heart that you intended them to begin within. And that's really important. And I think the hardest thing in all life is money, whether it's, personal relationships or business. And when that can get over with and become a functionary procedure,
absolutely,
it then allows everything else to be something better. Not that it's easy. It's not easy. And it's the most difficult thing all along the way. But if it isn't dealt with and it isn't managed properly, it becomes a disaster.
And one more question related to business. You had talked about setting in place a structure so that the company can go on without you and past you. But I understand that, a Fortune 500 company, obviously, but a company where it's you, David Monn.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
It's a challenge, and it is, what I try to do, it's not easy to do, is to be surrounded by people that, well, first you have to be passionate about wanting to be in this business or in this world or of this industry. But to be able to teach people, it kind of takes you back to the very beginning when I was talking about, these rules of using the senses, and it's sort of a formula. And when you have a structure of a formula, it's not that it is void of personality. The personality next comes in is to teach people the sensibilities of what it is that I do or that are sort of the nature to me, and finding people that are educable to that and want that, And I do know that it's true. No company can just pick up and continue on without the person in it if it has a real distinct personality to it. It can evolve, and that's the fashion business as well.
That's right.
It's the same. It's the same thing.
Interesting.
We in America don't have. I've had this conversation often with several friends of mine that are American designers. Europe has a handoff of a house when you've created it, whether it's Chanel or Lanvin or Dior, all these wonderful, these fashion houses, even Valentino in the Italian side. There is a handoff that happens with other talent that comes on. The house does not leave its identity, it takes on another one. But the identity that was set in place was really important and done that. In America, it is entirely about the person. And unfortunately, we see it often that then they only become a name that they sell as a label, whether it was, say, Halston or Cardin or Bill Blass. These houses have a hard time continue on because it's sort of not in the American DNA to do it, and it's a phenomenon that can't sort of quite be figured out why that is, because we don't have a tradition of that here happening. But I'd like to think in this world, what I would care more about from from my end of creating this business, that there was a business structure that was put in place and a creative element, and the two are not mutually void of each other, but that they are important together. That there could be the business end that continues and a creative end that cares about the principles, cares about the sensibilities, cares about the process in the way that I have done what I've done, and as sort of second nature, not necessarily as something that I've envisioned. It just has been doing what I do. I always people say to me, well, what is it? And I over time have tried to back it in my head and say, what is it that I do so I could pass that on?
Sure.
And because I've just sort of done what it feels natural to me. And I do have that within the company. I mean, I will tell you, it's really very funny to listen to many of the people who work for me when they go home to their families at holidays, whether it's how the tablecloth is done or how the table is set, almost every single person that works for me will say they can never really go to anybody else's party and not be destroyed or feel like they have to work.
Oh, completely.
And I like that in a bit, because that means they've learned it and they carry it on, and they care about it.
Yeah.
So that's I don't have the answer to say that it's a possible thing to do so easily.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that it is something. And we're in a time now where there are people that have created very substantial businesses in this industry. And I think the benefit of the industry is that we do and would have a structure in place, that there's successions to these companies, because it would strengthen the industry in a way, because what that person, I take myself as an example, what I have done for all these years, if I leave this at a time, whether it's, close the lid on the box or I want to, retire to something else, that all of these people, first off, there's an entire world of people that exist in this. Probably that I care more about anything, that these people have a continuation.
Right. Yeah.
But that structure is a mechanism to move forward.
Also, this is very simplistic, what I'm about to say concept, but so many people don't even consider that. So just to simply put it in your mind to think, I want to set in place some kind of a structure such that it can continue, changes everything.
Oh, I mean, that's
just the perspective.
Look, I say there are three things in life that God gives us, right? And they are blessings, they are opportunity, and their free will. And I have been extraordinarily blessed. I've been given talent and an ability, and I've had incredible opportunities that have been given to me. I have sweat for them.
Yeah,
okay,
sure.
But there are many, many, many times that I would like to say, I've had enough of this. Because this industry, as glamorous as it may seem, and as beautiful as it is a very, very hard industry. And the pressures are intense in it. I can't say I don't want to do that, because I have people that have committed their beings to me in this, to me first, because they believe in what I'm doing. Not they don't need a job. You do not come to work for, I don't think you come to work for any of these companies that do what we do because you need a job.
Oh God, no, there's got to be
because
passion.
You're passionately wanting to be in this industry and in this creation. And for me, I know my people are in it because they passionately believe in the things I believe in and seeing what we bring to life. So I have an obligation to them to be honoring that they've given that from themselves, that I can't just be self-centered in that, and when I'm done, and they're not. No, I can't.
Before we go, David, we had quite a dynamic conversation before I hit the record button. Is there anything else that you would really like to say here related, anything from what we talked about before? I know we were into some real passionate conversation there. Yeah, well, we were covering politics in the world, and I think one of the things we were talking about in this business, and I think it's also often, I would think many of our
other people, colleagues face this same sort of question. And in the time that we're in, I grew up a poor boy.
I remember your story.
I am a boy from Pennsylvania, and I have had the fortune to be able to, the good fortune to be able to work for many people that have made great sums of money. And we are, I think, in a time that has very broad extremes. And I'm often challenged when people say to me, how could you, numbers are always thrown around. People love to throw numbers. I think that's the interesting thing about today that's very different. And I do remember from early, when I first started in this business, nobody told you how much money they had. You didn't tell people, how much your net worth was. I think it was before Wikipedia and Google could tell you how much money people have or make. But I remember when Forbes did early on the first billionaires list. Mm-hmm. And there were people on that list. I can remember this earlier because most all of them in New York, except for one of them, were clients of mine. And it was an interesting thing because it was at a time that people actually were uncomfortable for a brief moment, and then it became a badge of honor of being in that list. You wanted people to know you were a billionaire. And that's very different today. So people love to tell you how much money they spend. And often the dollar numbers to the things we do in a time when, and then certainly in New York, and I just came from LA and San Francisco recently, and the homeless situation in our cities, in our major cities, is so unbelievable right now. It's something I'm very passionately concerned about and trying to help in this because there's something so wrong in it. But yet I have people that say to me, how can you be doing a party for someone that's X $1 million? And I am very quick to tell them that this business is one that is really built on labor. And it's not built in high profit, I can assure you. And I don't know of anybody else that will say that they're flying off in their private planes anywhere that's in this business. That this business actually feeds a lot of people. Yeah. And so when you really look at what this business is and someone else is spending their money, for me, I would say, not because it's my business, but I would say in the humanitarian way, I'm much happier that they would spend their money throwing a party than they go buy one piece of art that feeds one person. Right. So, it's something to feel proud of. And I know that I'm sure many of your listeners are listening to that are in this business, and they deal with this, and they deal with people questioning how could people do what we do? Because to do what we do, by the way, costs money, and people need to spend money. And there should be no shame in that, actually. Because we're not doing it for one single person. We're doing it with a lot of people. So. Yeah. Well, David, thank you again. I love sitting down with you and talking. And there's probably down the line going to be a part 3. I hope so. Every so often we need to sit down. Well, I love it. I love because actually you allow us to talk about things that are much more than the surface. The surface of what this industry does and is important, but it isn't what this industry is. And the colleagues in this that I respect that are really the forefront leaders of what we're doing, I would say would all say the same, that yes, to be in the league of what we do, you create, but then what really is this about? And you've allowed us to delve into that, and that's important. Well, thanks for saying that. I worked really hard to dig deep down, so thank you. Thank you again. Well, look forward to 3. Definitely.